And here we are, another episode of Empathy at the Table. And I'm here with the king of practice, Phil Brown. Phil, how are you? Thanks for joining us on Empathy at the Table.
I am absolutely fine, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here, Tony.
So where did the king of practice come from? Where did that name come? Share that with our listeners and put a bit of meat on the bone.
Well, if I'm really cheeky, it's just come off TikTok because I've just joined TikTok, and it said put a name up there. I thought, well, it's all practice. I thought I'll put the king of practice. But jokes aside, I mean, my background is procurement, and most people know this. They can check on my LinkedIn program. But after 30 years, I think what you build up over that period of time is a combination of experiences, which, if you can pull them together, can create something a bit unique. And what I came to realize in my early days when it came to negotiation skills, which is kind of my forte at the end of the day, is that it's really, really important, but it's not so easy to go off and practice and develop them in isolation. And what's actually happened is that over the years, I spent 4 years at a public speaking club, literally going after work once a fortnight, standing up in front of strangers, just having a speech, just making a speech up. And I thought, what a great way of practicing. I coached under sevens rugby teams and realized that, if you've got a group of people together, you've got to make sure they're all active. Otherwise, no matter what you're trying to teach them or train them or coach them, it's not going to work. So what's happened is, I guess, is over the years, I've sort of brought this together and think, well, how can I do something for the world of negotiation? How can I help people improve their negotiation skills? And, I thought of creating a negotiation club. And it's really as a result of that, all of these things have happened. And the main thing being that, I guess what I've done is I've found a way of practicing negotiation skills very, very quickly, a lot of fun, but has immediate impacts. And it's astounded me as well. So, sorry, that's my brief explanation of where it came from. Yeah, the practice king.
Well, yeah, on your LinkedIn profile, it says here, personally, I really enjoy what I do and helping people. So when somebody engages with Phil, what are you actually helping them to do?
The curious thing is that when we talk about negotiation skills, there isn't really a negotiation skill. Okay, it's a combination of skills. It's a combination of personal skills, listening, questioning, observing. I always go through those ones particularly. But it's also part of the fact that we're social animals. We're humans. We like to communicate. And as humans, we also like to be liked as well. So it all comes together in a negotiation, and in negotiation is quite tough because it also involves a lot of rejections or rejecting others. And I think what happens is when people come to me, first of all, it's a shock at how simple the practice is, but the implications for them as individuals is even more profound. And the reason I say that is because what they're doing is they're practicing some of the simple things, and it actually boosts people's confidence. And really, it's all about the confidence. I know that there's a number of firms out there, and I went on a course with the Gap Partnership many years ago, and I remember the phrase they used, which is to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that's exactly what I do now, is I help people become comfortable in these uncomfortable situations. So when they walk away from it, they're in a much better place, in their heads as well, which is really important in negotiation.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've followed your stuff, as you know. I think we've known each other for about maybe just over a year. And we came together on a platform like this where we were sharing with each other. And your work has consistently, if I may say, your work has consistently almost put two fingers up to the academic way of looking at negotiation, right? Let's not... there's an academic framework, and I think you have a healthy respect for that. But your work is like, no, look, let's get down and dirty, and let's really just practice a single skill in our sessions. Tell me more about how, what's the driver for that, and how people respond to that type of practice.
I guess the driver to it is that, well, actually, there's a couple of reasons for this, all right? So, first things, I'm going to go back
Yeah,
to the
yeah.
fact that I wanted to create a negotiation club, all right? Now, if you
Hmm.
go on traditional training courses, okay, and I advise everybody go on training courses, and as far as the academia is concerned, do the research because you bring it all together. But what I realized is
Hmm.
when I was going to start negotiation club was there's no way I'm going to be writing thousands of case studies. I mean, literally pages of stuff.
Right, right.
You're in this scenario, you need to do this, that, and the other. And
Yeah, yeah.
I had to find a very quick way of allowing people, like the public speaking, just to say, right, have a negotiation. So I started to distill it down, distill it down, distill it down. And then when I came to it, I kind of realized, well, you
Hmm.
know what? All we need is a difference of position in order to start a negotiation. And I come from the commercial world. So, you have price, you have lead times, you have quality, you have all these other things. So what I did is I actually created some negotiation cards. And the first set of cards I created, they had 6 or 7 different variables on them. Standard stuff in commercials. Like I said, price, lead times, quality, whatever it is, volumes. And I got them printed. I then tested them out. And through testing it, I found that some things worked, some things didn't work. But then ultimately, I found that if I reduced it all the way down to one variable, which is effectively over price. I know people say, oh, we don't need to negotiate over price. It's not about the price. It's the fact that we've got a difference and we're trying to come to an agreement. That's what it is. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Phil, go on then. Show
Go,
us a card as you're doing. If you got a card, have you got one handy?
yeah, I got a few. Okay. So,
Yeah.
so
Unfortunately, for those who are listening on the iTunes or on Spotify, you won't be able to see this. But if you're on YouTube, you'll see it clearly, and Phil will explain exactly what we're seeing.
yeah. So listen, you create two
Yeah,
cards, one for a buyer,
right,
one for a seller. And literally you have
right,
different
right.
variables on them. And it's almost a game. You shuffle the cards up, you have a card each,
Yeah.
and then you've got to really come to an agreement using what variables you have. Okay. Now, like I said, I started in the early days with lots of variables on there. I found that actually, even with the most professional people, they just died. It just didn't work so easily for them. I ended up actually going down to
Hmm.
single variables. So you had a buyer and a seller with basically a break even and a budget. And what I then wanted to do is make sure that we kept the time short. So I ended up saying, look, 3 minutes or 4 minutes to have a negotiation using those variables. And like I said, it's phenomenal. Anybody can use these cards to create an opportunity
Hmm.
to negotiate, to practice a negotiation. And then coming back to your first point, which is, starting to go and just focus on one aspect. The reality is there are so many skills, so many tactics out there. I mean, Chris Voss has got his book, Never Split the Difference. You look in there, lots and lots of little tactics you can use. Where do you practice them? You don't.
Yeah.
But you get a deck of cards. Tony, you're a buyer, you have a budget. Phil, you're a seller, you have a break even point. You need to agree a price. By the way, we're going to use one of the tactics out of that book. For example, mirroring.
Hmm.
And what we do for 4 minutes, you don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what you're doing, but we can just practice that skill. I can practice mirroring with you. I can see how it works, how it doesn't work. It can be obvious, it can be unobvious. But what it does is it suddenly brings the books alive. It suddenly brings
Hmm.
the research alive. Because when somebody says, oh, you need to use for argument's sake, a range tactic. Sounds great. Where do you try it? What happens if it doesn't
Hmm.
work? Well, have a practice. Just get a card out, have a go. So I've
Hmm.
literally gone from the one end, which is very detailed training and negotiations, going down in the minutiae of it, to the other extreme, which is actually I don't really care about that because the reality is at some point we have to be sat opposite one another, and we need to be able to ask a question. And even asking a question is
Hmm.
not always as simple as it sounds. So that's where I've come from in
Yeah,
that, and
yeah.
that's where the cards come from.
So it's like going into the gym and deciding I'm going to work on one specific muscle set, right? Rather than spending like 2 hours in the gym doing everything, You go and you say, right, today is arms and specifically biceps. I'm going to do 2 exercises on that, half an hour, 45 minutes, whatever it is, and that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, probably
Yeah.
a bet. The analogy I always like to work on is if you want to play tennis,
Mm.
you want to improve your game of
Mm.
tennis. And what you do is you can
Yeah.
go down to a tennis court. You can have a game of tennis with somebody, and you play game after game after game after game. Yeah, you can improve that way. But if you really want to improve, and this is where the professionals do it, they go down to the tennis court with a basket of balls and a coach. And all they do is they
Mm.
practice their serve. They practice their serve. They get feedback. They try it again. Then they'll do the backhand, just the backhand, the backhand. Now, when they go and play a game, they may be called upon to use any one of those skills. But because they've practiced it in isolation and honed it, when it comes to using it
Yeah.
in the game, it works. And that's exactly the
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
principles for negotiations. Use of
Mm.
silence. Practice it, practice it, practice it to the point where if you're in a negotiation, you might have to use it, but when you do, you've got it absolutely teed.
How do you respond to the statement when people say, "Well, you're using tactics and using this. It's all manipulation. It feels manipulated, and maybe has some dark intent."
I got a feeling it might have been you that mentioned this about a year ago. You said tactics. Well, they don't sound very good, and you really made me think about this because I actually did think about it. I thought, you know what? We call them tactics because we're doing it in isolation, but they're actually skills.
Mm.
All right. So,
Yes. Yes.
I call asking an open question a tactic, but it's also a skill.
Mm.
And asking an
Right.
open question is not manipulative. It gets you forward. It can get both parties forward as well.
Yeah.
Um, really, I personally, what is manipulative to one person is just the run of the mill to another. Okay, we cannot
Mm.
control the other party's approach to a negotiation. Okay, we can't control what they know, their experiences, what their plans are, what their strategy. The only thing we can control is ourselves and how good we're at it as well. So if somebody
Yeah.
says,
Yeah.
"Oh,
Sure.
that professional flinch, that's manipulation," well, for some people it is, but for some people that's just the normal game for them. That's what they do. They don't feel anything wrong or
Yeah.
bad about it. So I'm not one of those who sort of goes around saying this is what you should do. In fact, I would be saying go and practice your professional flinch because the other person is going to learn from you doing that, and you'll learn from them.
Right.
But actually doing that, because for those of you who are not familiar, professional flinch is the reactions you give to a response, trying to instill the other party that you cannot accept it, even though you can. But when you
Yeah.
practice that, what it does is it teaches you to observe the other party. Okay. And observation, I say to everybody, for me, observation is perhaps the most important skill of a negotiator, and you can't learn it from books. You can only do it,
Mm.
through experience. So manipulation, I don't,
Phil, I
I
think
don't know
one
whether it's
thing.
this. So go on.
No, one thing that you haven't said, which is really important, and I've been in one of your sessions, and we've talked about this a lot, is the element of having you there, having somebody observing the negotiation in real time and giving feedback. So one thing is the practice, but the other thing is having an expert there who can feedback what they're seeing in real time.
Yeah, absolutely, and there's a lot of things with that as well. You know, um, and now that we've got video technology, and now that we've got things like Zoom and
Hmm.
Teams and everything else, the ability for people to practice in groups and in a business has just it's just the opportunity has exploded. Not the fact that people are doing it,
Hmm.
but the opportunity has exploded. And one of the key things about it is that, in negotiations, particularly if it's face to face or in person, okay, I go back to the fact we're social animals, okay? We take a lot of the cues from what we see as well as what we hear. And what we see can have a huge impact. If somebody looks confident, all right, and it's kind of how do you describe the look of confidence? It's very difficult, but you will
Hmm.
notice it. It's part of our psyche. So the more you practice, the more you observe. The more you observe, the more you start to understand the way that people behave, the way that people react. And don't think for 1 minute we're all completely unique. We have elements which are literally the same across all of us, you know. And For me, having a third party observe is wonderful for them to be able to give feedback to you because you miss things out. And secondly, as an observer, you learn so much as well. I mean, I've had 30 years in negotiations in procurement. Almost every one of my negotiations was on my own behind a closed door. Nobody was observing me. Nobody gave me feedback. And yet
Yeah, yeah,
we can learn so much from that. And again, the negotiation cards in 4 minutes. I mean, yesterday I did a live broadcast negotiation. People who are watching it, you can see stuff and you think, wow, God, I never even saw that before. And we will all
yeah,
see something
sure.
different,
Yeah.
which adds to it as well.
So let's get into the woods a bit with your negotiation. You've got 30 years in procurement, so you're at the real, the sharp end of negotiation. You mentioned, I think I saw in your profile that there was one particular client you worked for that you were able to reduce costs by 68%. I think it was an iconic branding, iconic merchandising.
Oh,
I mean, I just want to break that down. What does a negotiation like that look like, Phil? How do you approach it? What are the elements? What are the moving pieces of a negotiation like that?
that's fine. I've just got it down. It was an orb, all right, cuddly toys. All right. So
Right.
for those of you who
Yeah.
can't see, this is almost like a little tennis ball, but it's a very little um, piece of merchandise. So I'll give you the background. So hopefully we've got some time on it. So
Yeah.
first day at work, all right, literally the first day at work, 10:30 in the morning. My boss and I joined as a marketing category manager. My boss said, "Oh, marketing, they're having a meeting with a supplier now. I think we should go and have a look." Okay, so off we trundle. We go into the room. Lo and behold, two people from the marketing department, two people from the agency, and they're talking over the creation of this merchandise, these two orbs that were going to represent certain parts of the business. So anyway, they didn't know we were coming in, but we sat there. So this procurement sat there and literally observed. And we had the two marketers and the two agencies talking away, talking about how wonderful the designs were, what they were doing, everything else. Yeah, it's all within budget. We know what volumes we want. That's fantastic. Okay. And then literally the marketeers stood up and said, right, well, thank you very much. We're going to leave you here with procurement. They're going to talk about the price and the contract. And they got up and left. All right.
Wow.
At which point my new boss looked at me and said, right, I'll see you later, and left me on my own within about an hour and a half with these two gentlemen who literally started grinning. All right, they were grinning at me. And I was like, okay, what do I do now? Because I'm thrown into a negotiation, no preparation. So what I did was I said, look, it's my first day. I said, I've just come from the automotive industry, do a lot of manufacturing. So I really love the manufacturing process. I got to say, tell me about these. Where do you make them? How do you make them? And they were very proud. They said, no, we get them in China. We can do it on bulk. These are the machines that we kind of use, and we do all this other stuff. So anyway, about 45 minutes later, they agreed to reduce the price from £1.15 each to about £1.14 each. So they took give me a penny off. I thought, right, okay. But now I had a much better understanding of really more the marketplace and what they were doing and where it was coming from. So what I did then is over a few days, I went back to the marketeers. I said, look, what's been agreed? What do you have? And the first thing I found out was they hadn't even really agreed who owned the design rights to it. All right. It had literally been created on the back of a fag packet in a pub between the marketing director and this agency. Okay. So first thing I did was actually cleverly email a situation which said, like, this is our designs, we're talking to you about it. That was fine. As soon as I got that sorted out, I then went to try and find an alternative supplier. And I just started doing some work on another piece of merchandise with a different supplier, spoke to them, didn't give them the prices. But what I did then, and that was the other thing. As soon as I told my colleagues in marketing I was talking to another supplier, they were like, no, don't want you to do that. We don't want to rock the boat. These are suppliers. We've worked with them. Fine. So I still went and spoke to the other suppliers, and I said, right, get me some samples. So I ended up with samples from one supplier, samples from the other supplier, and I went back to the marketing department. I sat them down. I said, "Listen, here's some samples. Okay, one of them is £1.14 per item. The other one is 76 pence per item." And they had a look and they couldn't tell the difference. All right. So for them at that moment, although there was a relationship, ultimately they just needed the product. So which one's the 76 pence one? Yeah, okay, we'll have those. What then
Mm.
recurred after that was a conversation between the two suppliers. And in fact, as the price was coming down, the marketing department was like, "Oh, we can buy more of them." So long story short, I ended up dual supplying. We ended up buying, going from 5,000 units to 1.5 million units. The price obviously came down from £1.14 down to, I think, 32 pence and I think 36 pence. We split the supply up, but they were exactly the same products. And that changed the marketing campaign for about 7 years. Totally changed it because they suddenly had something that actually, and it actually became iconic for them as well. Now, for me, that's
Mm.
an entire negotiation, but it also required me to draw upon my experiences of all the other places I've worked, be asking questions, not to cut anything aside, and to work cleverly with the internal stakeholders to assure them they were going to get what they want. It wasn't for me to say whether this was the right design of the product. That's for them to do. All I need to do is get it on the table in front of them and make sure they've got a quality product. And that's what my role was within
Mm.
procurement.
Mm. Excellent. It sounds like what was really key there was you being able to not go for the deal straight away. You kind of took a step back, and you did it in reverse. Most people, we say, do your preparation and homework first, but you didn't have the opportunity. So you bought yourself the time to go and do your preparation and homework. And then in that stage, you were able to get more and more information that became more relevant. So that's your classic expand the pie, but you expanded the pie almost in reverse.
Yeah, I mean, what I would also say is that for the vast majority of negotiations, there is no preparation. All right, you can almost
Mm.
imagine a pyramid, and this is why I was thinking about it the other night. Actually, you can imagine a pyramid. Okay, now at the bottom of the pyramid, the base of the pyramid, for me, is skills. And in skills for negotiation, they're the same skills you use in every single negotiation. All right, questioning, listening, observation.
Mm.
You use them in every negotiation. Okay. You then have another layer, which is above it, which is situational. And the reality is that most of the negotiations are similar by nature. They're repeatable. If you're a small if you're a small business, you're going to have the same type of negotiations and discussions time and time again. Okay, so you have these repeat situations. You then have, like, at the
Mm.
top of the pyramid, these unique ones, which are the ones where you can prepare for. You put the effort in, you get a lot of information. There may be big value, there may be big impact. So you can prepare for those. But the reality is you need the skills. All right, you absolutely need the skills. That's your foundation. Okay, then you
Mm.
can almost get yourself, it's like playing football. Once you've played enough, it doesn't really matter. You can go out and play every time, you can get a ball out on the field, you go and play, okay? But then when you've got the major matches as championships, that's when you prepare, you study the other party, you do all the bits of work for it. But I would say that 80-20
Mm.
probably applies. I would say that 80% of our negotiations are never planned for, and that's saying something. And perhaps 20% of them are. And what happens is that we get
Well,
this focus on the planning and the preparation, but it's built on a weak foundation. So you can go into the negotiation with all the planning and preparation in the world, but if it doesn't go according to plan, you don't have the skills to bring it back on course.
this is where I always love talking with you because we actually see this from different angles, right? And listen, the next time I'm in the UK, I'm going to reach out to you because there's a whole evening conversation just packed into this half an hour.
With a deck
So
of cards.
I do believe in preparation. I do believe in preparation and planning. I think, but maybe it's how we look at the preparation, right? That's different because I think sitting in one of your classes and doing one of your classes, that's part of the preparation, right?
Yeah.
It's part of being able to prepare. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're preparing specifically for that negotiation, but the prep that you do, having the skills at your fingertips and being able to use them, that's all part of it. Now, the planning part, I definitely agree that not all negotiations, in fact, some of the most critical negotiations happen with me and my wife when we're talking about the kids, and that wasn't planned. It just happened to happen over dinner, and thank goodness that there was some preparation, but maybe not so much planning, right? So I think there's a crossroads there, right, where we can agree that a lot of all negotiations require you to be able to prep, but not all of them give you the opportunity to be able to plan.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So that you're right. Preparation and planning. You've just separated it out there. It's a bit like when we talk about
Yeah,
tactics and skills. Okay. We're probably talking about the
right,
same thing to a certain level. I think when I'm talking about preparation,
right.
I'm talking about the fact when you sit down and you're doing your market research and it's all about that uniqueness of that situation. But there's also a level of preparation,
Okay,
which is the preparation of the skills and the mindsets and the, even looking after your
got
body,
it.
you
Yeah,
know. So it's
yeah,
bringing
yeah,
those
yeah,
together. Because the reality is that almost anybody's going to be able to negotiate. I mean, you can stick anybody into negotiation, but it's all
yeah,
of these
yeah.
elements that
Sure.
you layer on top, which is going to lead to any success. The level of success is really going to be down to all of these elements you're working on.
Correct. Yeah,
Um, and,
yeah,
and, and like I said, the biggest challenge that we have is that we very rarely get feedback. So we live in our own little isolated bubble of what we think is a good
yeah,
negotiation.
yeah. Phil, your dad was a negotiator. He taught negotiation. So was it always going to be? I mean, you've been around in this industry for 30 years. Was that already written in the stars?
I mean, he has and he continues to influence me big time.
Hmm.
He set up his own business. He saw a gap in the market in the early days. He delivered, wrote the courses, everything else. Um, I think when I started, because I started to get involved in his business when I was 10. I mean, I literally was a 10-year-old. He was so busy. I used to do the video cameras and video as, two people would come out of his course, come into the room. I would video them having a negotiation. As it was, it used to be over rubber gloves or Goliath cranes. I still remember that now, 40 years on. And it did
Wow.
influence me. And I thought, oh, well, family business here. I should be able to take this over, shouldn't I? My dad said to me, he said, yeah, okay, that's something, but you need to go and get the experience. You need to go out and actually get experience. So I literally came out and said, right, I'm going to go into procurement. That's where it was. So there's not many people who go into procurement on purpose, but I had that roadmap from
Hmm.
at the age of 10. That's where I wanted to go. So I went into the industries and started doing procurement. But what I also did was I purposely moved different industries. So it wasn't just different companies within a industry, it was different industries entirely. So I've worked in broadcasting, the broadcasting industry, the IT industry, utilities, transport. So I've worked in all these different ones. And what I was doing every time I worked in a different company was I was trying to build up my experience and my skill sets. When I worked in the automotive industry, the OEM side, they got their manufacturing processes and they were negotiating down to the fractions of the pennies. Okay. When I worked in the broadcasting industry, money was no object. Totally different. It's all about getting the stakeholders on board,
Hmm.
and it's massive stories there. And when I talked about this merchandise, it's almost a case of bringing those two elements I'd had previously together. Understanding the manufacturing process, but understanding the stakeholder importance, building up those skill sets to do that. Now, as it was, I thought, whoa, at some point I'll go back and take over the family business. But it wasn't to be had, and I mean, for whatever reasons. But I still enjoy the training, the coaching, the supporting, and particularly of the younger generation coming through as well. Um, and that's where
Hmm.
my passion has been. So, although my father was in it, huge inspiration, my pathway to get where I am is a different pathway to his, but it's one that I thoroughly enjoy.
Hmm. You said you really enjoy working with young children, and I've seen that. I know I've seen on your LinkedIn you've done some stuff at universities. What stuck out for me, there was some stuff you did at a national, I think it was a national Ukraine university where you were
Oh yeah,
working, and you said that
yeah,
you had to use Google Translator to communicate with them.
yeah. It was great. I mean, Oksana, who is at the West National Ukraine University, I think it is, who I'm still supporting and doing work with at the moment. She reached out
Hmm.
probably almost a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, and ultimately they're developing their own sort of area of expertise in negotiations and communications and mediations. And obviously they've got some real challenges out there, full stop anyway. But
Sure.
um, negotiations are universal. It has no boundaries. You know, um, uh, every single one of us across the globe has to negotiate. It's part of what makes us,
Hmm.
again, as a human, species, highly successful. And when they reached out, yeah, we spent some time. I took the tactics, which are generic tactics, open questions. It's the same in any language, but it needs to be translated. Translated it with a bit of, Google translation, but also with their translator. So we ended up creating negotiation cards and tactic cards written in Ukrainian. I
Wow.
deliver and delivered the workshops with them with a translator. And again, fascinating to be able to do that. And and I think what that also has shown me is that the simplicity of the model that I've got works no matter where you are, who
Yeah.
you are, what language you are, and what age you are. You know,
Yeah.
I think we sometimes in the corporate world think of negotiation training as something that only certain functions should have and
Yeah.
certain
Yeah.
seniority should
Yeah.
have. And I can tell you absolutely right now that the vast majority of negotiations are being done by the workforce, not by the
Yeah.
CEOs.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I absolutely agree. You know, there's well, I teach emotional intelligent negotiation, and I'm really, I'm big on the role that emotional intelligence plays in a negotiation, all the stuff that's going on in the shadow that has an effect, but people don't want to talk about. People roll their eyes up when you kind of, say, well, where's the level of empathy here? How are you connecting with the other person? Where do you shake out on this, Phil?
I, it's massively important. Okay, I mean, emotional intelligence. I mean, I presume that's kind of what we're talking about. Emotional intelligence is such a fundamental part. The challenge with
Hmm.
negotiations is that, again, what we have two parties coming together to try and find a solution, but the vast majority of those negotiations are selfish based. It's what can I get?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
and coming back to the planning and preparation, most people are going into negotiations and they know what they want, they know the strategies they're going to use. And even during the negotiations, their mind is being brought back to their plan. Right? Am I on plan? Am I doing what I need to be doing? Right? Okay. So
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
literally have no focus on the other party. Okay.
Hmm.
Now, when I've been practicing and when we practice, we had a great one yesterday. I mean, we had a great one yesterday. Mike Inman,
Yeah. I saw
good
it with
friend. Yeah,
Mike trying to practice silence.
exactly. So he went, and
Yeah.
people might not recognize this, okay? But if you've ever spoken to Mike or had a negotiation with Mike, he's a certain style. The moment he had
Yeah.
silence as a tactic, so he had to use it, his whole negotiation was affected by
Yeah.
it
Completely. Yeah.
because he was kind of focused on, how is he going to do it, where is he going to do it. So he was quiet all the
Hmm.
time. He was, no response, everything else. And I think that's where the challenge comes in negotiations and empathy and the emotional intelligence is that once we get focused on what we are trying to do, we lose touch with the other party.
Yeah.
Now, as far as Mike is concerned, I can guarantee him and anybody else, if you practice enough the use of silence as a skill or a tactic, okay, you'll know how it works, where it doesn't work, okay? Once you've practiced it, you don't have to think about it. It will become
Hmm.
natural to you. You'll know the right places to be silent. Okay. And people often think of silence as, an overt, a manipulative type thing. It's not. There are certain places you have to be silent. You have to learn that. But once you've learned it, you don't have to focus on it and think about it, which means at that moment, you can be focused on the other party. You can then start to think
Hmm.
about the other party, be empathetic with the other party. And it's the same with all of those skills. Once you layer up all of those skills, you can develop that and you can create an opportunity whereby you um, You're not having to think about anything. It just happens. Going back to the tennis analogy, you don't have to think about your backhand. You've practiced it so much, it
Yeah,
just happens. You're focused on where the other party is.
yeah,
It's exactly the
yeah,
same here. And when you do that,
yeah,
you will be able to build up empathy. You will be able to really understand the other party because you don't have to keep worrying about your position. You've got the skills to do it.
yeah.
Does that help? Does that kind of make
So
it?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I work a lot with leaders, companies, and helping them with their teams. And you work with students and teams and individuals. So we're kind of in the same ballpark, but maybe coming at different angles. I want to ask you a question. What does the world look like, Phil, when um, companies are negotiating using empathy, using emotional intelligence, using the skills that you're teaching them and they're practicing? How does a company look different when they're doing that as a as a strategy rather than the me?
All right, so I'm just going to go back a little bit here. You teach the leaders and the CEOs, okay? I teach the future leaders and CEOs. So I'm probably going to get in and influence them
Mm,
before they get to your level, okay? But
mm,
we're all people at the end of the day. In terms of what it would look like. Now, if every if you have a company, all right, if you have a company and you introduce negotiation as an opportunity for people to practice, okay, you're going to do a lot of things within that company. First of all, there's a lot of people negotiating. I went to visit a supplier once, and while I was sat there in reception, I overheard the receptionist having a conversation with a travel firm, who was looking to actually put into place an agreement to arrange all of the travel for the business. But this was a receptionist. Okay, now she may have had a few other jobs, but I can guarantee you she's never been on a negotiation course. And yet
yeah,
she
yeah.
was going to be influencing potentially a 100,000 or 200,000 pounds worth of spend or more. So everybody is negotiating. Now,
Mm,
if you
mm,
introduce the opportunity for your staff or your employees or your teams to practice, first thing you're doing is you're creating a safe space for them to practice. Okay, we can try things out, and there's a real art to practicing negotiation skills. Okay, the next thing you're also doing is you're starting to create the ability to give feedback. We talked about the observation role. Well, feedback is massively important. And what you're also doing is you're demonstrating to everybody in the business that there is no perfect negotiator. We all have different styles, and therefore we can all not only learn from one another, but also perhaps be more suited to different scenarios and situations.
yeah,
So if you actually were to bring in some concept or some art of, like, let's practice some of these skills, negotiation is part of it. What you're actually going to do is you're going to build, a very, very tight knit group of individuals, know one another, supporting one another, be able to be open to giving feedback, be open to understanding the criticism that's needed when it's needed, but also the praise when it's praised. You will have a situation where, the CEO does not have to rely upon reports and third party and auditors to ensure that their teams are getting the best deal. So one thing that frustrates
mm,
the hell out of me is um, procurement having savings targets. What are you saving? What are you targeting? If you put
right.
all of your efforts into making sure that your procurement team have the best negotiation skills, then you're pretty much going to get the best negotiated outcome you possibly can. What that measures or compares to is irrelevant. If you're £100,000 and you spend £60,000 on the cost of two auditors in your business to constantly be checking the value and the benefits and all of the savings, and you spend 40,000 on the training, I tell you what, I'd be more inclined to spend 100,000 on the training and not actually monitor the savings, because the savings are going to be there, and
Yeah,
you can't even assess all of those savings, because some of it isn't about the budget, what's spent. Some of it is about the lead times, the risks, the avoidance of situations that would have occurred if they hadn't negotiated. But you'll never know that. So
mm,
my view is that if you were to encourage, not even complex, but if you were to encourage your staff members across the board to get involved in negotiations and practice, you'll create a phenomenally tight knit and well run company. Does that answer it?
Phil? Yeah, well, Phil, like you said, there's no right or wrong, right? There's just options, and that's
Absolutely.
what I hear. It's fantastic. I hope our listeners are really getting real value from this, because you've been in the industry for 30 years. I've been in your sessions. You're great. You observe things that most people don't see. And you have a real beautiful knack of being able to give really good feedback in a way that it's taken non-defensively. It's taken in a great way, and people leave feeling empowered. So, this is really great stuff, and I hope listeners will jump on and follow you. And on that note, Phil, how do people find you, and what is it that our listeners can do to help you? What are you working on that's so exciting?
Okay, so there's a couple of things. First of all, if anybody wants to find me, obviously LinkedIn, and it's the Negotiation Club. But you can also go to the webpage and check out the webpage. Now, I recognize that practicing negotiation skills is somewhat unique. It's not your traditional training, I would say. So what I do is every month I offer the opportunity to come along on a free 90-minute negotiation practice workshop. Effectively, it's the starting point. It's the opening of the gate to practicing. I run it every fourth Thursday of the month. So, in fact, for those, I don't know whether you'll get this out now or if it's live, but for example, tomorrow at 6 o'clock, I'll have people who are registered, signed up. They'll be coming on. Haven't met anybody before, but they'll be practicing their negotiation skills. And what I hope to achieve from that is to provide an opportunity for people to have some insight into how to do things differently. And often from these we have conversations. I then will come into universities, I'll come into corporate businesses, deliver the workshops, and it does have a profound effect. What I'm also doing now is the negotiation cards. I mean, there really isn't any resource out there to help you practice your negotiation skills. So I want to try and make negotiation cards the de facto resource that people go to practice with. They get the cards out and have a go. So in that sense, again, they're on the website. You can buy them from there. If you do buy them from there, for example, you can obviously, there's another online course that shows you how to use them. But I'm also now starting to develop what I call a training set. So this is about 6 to 8 different packs of negotiation cards, everything from a single variable, 2, 3, 4, 6 variables, different tactics on them. I even have one deck of cards where the budget is all the same number and the break even is all the same number. So when you're in a workshop and you hand those out to everybody, all right, you think, oh, well, what can we do there? The reality is everybody agrees something differently. And there's a valuable lesson.
That's cool.
Which is done just in that one moment. So I've even got a deck of cards with just that. So if anybody is interested, I'm more than open to have a conversation with them. There's plenty of information on the website.
Thank you very much. And you can find all the information about Phil in the show notes. He's very, very approachable. You'll see him on LinkedIn. He's out there. He does his live shows. What do you call them? Pop-in negotiations?
Pop-up negotiation practice.
Pop-up negotiations. Yeah. Check him out on LinkedIn. It's great fun. Phil Brown, thanks for joining us on Empathy at the Table.
Thank you, Tony. It has been a pleasure.